Random Journeys into a Beautiful World. Written by Nettie Benton Fry. Narrated by C.E. Benton. Chapter 2. My first great childhood adventures came on August 5th, 1906. We rode into Ardmore, Indian Territory, much to the surprise, fear, and disappointment of our Texas relatives and friends. The E.E. Benton and the M.A. Stansbury families uprooted themselves from the quiet little town of Ed, UB, Texas, and moved to Indian Territory. Our relatives just knew we would be scalped. It was quite a wild adventure in those early days. Boxcars were chartered for household furnishings and all the livestock, including old Daisy the horse, Hart, my favorite cow, and Sport, our faithful bird dog, who was well up in his years. They all came by boxcar. The family rode in the chair coaches, and what a treat to ride in such elegant style for the whole 100 miles. The ride was a long one for us, as the trains in those days were less modern, less powerful, and they stopped at every little town. The Cannonball was the name of the train, and I can hear the click of the wheels even now. The headlight on the engine was so big and bright it looked like a monster's wild eye shining in early morning light the day we boarded her. The click of the telegraph wires, messages constantly being sent, communications near and far, which meant nothing to my young life, for all this was just another new and interesting part of our adventure. The hustle and bustle of activity around the depot was a source of great interest to us. The loading and unloading of freight, the bumping of the switching trains, connecting and getting ready for travel. All of this added to our waiting to be on our way. The travel time was long and weary for all of us. Russell and I were small, excited kids, too full of energy for our tired parents and grandparents before we reached our destination. I'm sure I have no idea of what time of day or night we arrived at our next to the last stop in Ardmore, Indian Territory. We stayed with Aunt Minnie and Uncle Carl until all of our possessions could be unloaded and plans made for the final leg of our trip to Springer in Indian Territory, where we were to live. We thought Aunt Minnie's house was a fine home, although she only had 5 rooms, 2 baths, no modern conveniences, but it was new, and she appeared to have a sort of stepped into high society. At last she gave us the feeling of being Mrs. Carl Jones. We were all so happy when the time came for us to load up the wagons and be on our way. The distance from Ardmore to Springer was 10 miles or so. The road was a winding, narrow dirt road, and it was hot and dry and dusty. The moving was done by wagon, and I suppose the animals walked those final 10 miles of our journey. Numerous trips were made before everything was completely transported to our new home. The family rode in a good old covered wagon, for that was our mode of travel. No cars, no planes, no trains to Springer. But what of it? We were all together happy and well. The good home-prepared food tasted so good when we stopped to eat under the shade of a tree. I doubt if we had ice to cool our water, or tea, or milk on that hot August day, but it was all so good and nourishing. Little did we realize what a shock was in store for us when we finally reached Springer, for we had looked forward with happy anticipation to see our new home. Well, we saw it, and what a sad sight it was. Tired, weary, hot, dusty people and animals, our hearts, hopes, and dreams sank into black despair as we looked at a one-room log cabin with a crude fireplace and a lean-to or a shed room. Indian Territory, weeds and sunflowers had grown as high as the roof of this horrible-looking place. My mother, who loved flowers and cleanliness, was actually sick. She wished for Ed, UB, Texas. The flower garden, she called it. We had left a nice home, relatives and friends, and came to this wild end of the world, so it seemed. Some kind individual came by, stopped to talk with Papa and Grandpa, and told them there was a nice house across the creek from the gin that was vacant. Inquiries were made about the house, and permission was given for us to move into it until arrangements could be made for us to live in our own place. We drove the short distance to the Kuntz house, not knowing that another shock was awaiting us. A member of the Kuntz family had recently been stricken with typhoid fever and died. It was a clean place, cool and shaded from the hot sun by tall elm trees, which made it such a welcome sight to hot weary travelers. We eagerly climbed out of the hot crowded wagons, anxious to get into the cool houses. Alas, our joy was short lived. The strong odor of the cleaning and fumigating agents of carbolic acid was so strong it almost took our breath. "We can't live here," my mother said. Besides, the danger of typhoid was too great for the family to risk. Well, evening was drawing near, so the decision was made to camp in the gin yard until other plans could be made for living. This we did for many, many days. There were tall pecan trees for shade and coolness, a lovely creek of cool, clear, babbling water, which my brother and I fully enjoyed. It rippled its course through a part of the gin yard, over rocks and pebbles, making a happy little tune that somehow gave a song of welcome cheer to a group of very homesick people. We were altogether well and determined to make the best of it. 10 miles is a long distance to haul lumber by wagon. Many trips back and forth were made to Ardmore before enough building material was ready to start adding on to the log house, but it had to be done before winter came. One room was built on the east of the one log room with a porch across the front. Then two were added to the back with a porch. This took a lot of time because other work had to be done, as ginning season became the 1st of September. The cotton crops were large and the gin ran day and night, so it was hard, long hours of work. Our new home was really nice and comfortable when completed. Friends and neighbors were kind and helpful in every way they could be. The hardships and disappointments were soon forgotten, as our new friends made us feel so welcome. There is such a closeness of good neighbors in a small town, as everyone has so much in common. Hard work to survive, few social activities, but those were good and happy days. As I remember these early days in the Indian Territory, there is only happiness. My brother and I were such carefree children, too young to realize what the cost of this pioneering venture had been to our parents and grandparents. Our relatives from Texas were very impressed with our new world. The mountains, the rocks in their huge formations, the Arbuckle Mountains appeared huge to them, for there are no mountains in Fannin County, Texas. Ed Hubie was a level farming land. We had such wonderful times when the family came to visit us from our old hometown. Crossing the Arbuckle Mountains to Turner Falls in the covered wagon was a trip that everyone enjoyed. Turner Falls and the Sulphur Springs in Indian Territory were our most enjoyable camping areas. And that yummy good food, cooked over the campfire, home-cured hams and sausages, canned vegetables and fruit, fried potatoes, cream gravy with hot biscuits, eggs, and coffee. There was nothing like it. Our tables groaned before the feast, and our family feasters groaned thereafter. These visits of our relatives made help all of us to settle into our new world, which was soon to become the state of Oklahoma. So the simple but difficult to grasp key to contentment is to realize that life in its entirety is a gift and not a right. Now we were ready to really make this an enjoyable and happy home. My brother and I were soon in school. I felt the responsibility of being my brother's keeper, and as such lived in fear of his being harmed by the older boys. You see, we were all going to school in one large room, all grades and ages together. There was one big wood-burning stove in the middle of the room. Our school building was larger in Ed Hubie, thanks to Grandpa Benton, who founded the school in that community. Of course, this was the early 1900s, so many changes were made in the later years. These new school friends became very dear to my brother and I, for they were lasting friends all through our young lives, and many still today. Some of them still live in the Springer, Oklahoma area. I shall never forget my dearest friend, Jessie Gillespie. She and I loved one another dearly. News in those days was slow to travel, but one news story I shall never forget. Halley's Comet was to be visible at a certain date, and reports were out that its tail was to sweep the earth, setting everything in its path afire, and completely destroying the earth. We were all in school one cold morning. The fire in the schoolroom was nice and warm. Jessie came to school that morning, and she was telling all of us about her new baby brother. But she said, "He will be burned to death by the comet." She was crying. Suddenly I became very ill. My teacher allowed me to go home, and when I got outside the schoolroom I began to run faster than I had ever run in my entire life, for I was scared to death. I just knew that the monster comet was certain to get me before I could reach my home. I took every short cut I knew, under the barbed wire fence, jumping ditches, and finally home. Breathless, but telling my frightful story to Mamma and Grandma, my precious Grandma lifted me into her lap, wrapped her arms around me. She began to sing, softly and so sweetly, a hymn that I cannot recall. Then she read from a paperback New Testament, the scripture from Matthew, chapter 24, verses 34, 37. These verses are still marked in my Bible today, and verse 36 has always been a present and heartfelt help to me these many years. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. How precious these memories are now, but to a frightened little girl they were trusted words of comfort and assurance from a loving Christian grandmother. Halley's comet has not destroyed this good earth yet, even when it passed by again recently, but so many times in my life I have told this frightening experience. Time mellows our lives, and we learn to live one day at a time. Certainly it is true that no one can predict the end of time, but we can trust and believe there is only one in control of our present and our future. Springer became a very happy home for us. We had made many new friends in this small community. The ginning season proved to be a thriving business for Papa, Grandpa. The later years, even though there are friends living who speak so kindly of my family and the fairness of their business dealings with them. We all belonged to the Methodist Church in Springer. Grandpa had a beautiful voice, and he loved to sing in the choir, "Lead, kindly light, and onward, Christian soldiers." These were two of his favorite songs. Miss Lucy Eldridge was another choir member. She was a very tall, heavy-set, pretty woman. I never hear I loved to tell the story without thinking of her, for she could sing it so beautifully, and I would wish to be able to sing as she did. Going to Sunday school and church was a happy time for all of us. It was something all of the family believed in deeply. The summer revivals were looked forward to with eagerness. Of course, there were brush arbor meetings involving all the families of the communities. The singing was wonderful for young and old alike. There were tired, sleepy kids, but mothers took care of that with quilts and blanket pallets for sleepy heads. I would be so sleepy after church at night. Papa would take me in his arms, and Mamma would get Russell in hers, and they would walk home in the dark, and dark it was. There were no street lights, only the lanterns to guide our steps. We had no easy-to-handle flashlights, just the stars or the moonlight for light. The crickets and the smell of the good earth, and lightning bugs darting here and there, such sweet, secure, and happy childhood memories. Holidays were all such wonderful times for our family and community. There was the 4th of July picnics to look forward to, red soda pop, lemonade, good food and basket lunches to spread under the tall, cool trees, families sharing and enjoying fun times together, gay balloons, whistles, games of horseshoes, dominoes, and foot races. No mechanical rides like my children, grandchildren, or the great-grandchildren now enjoy, but we kids felt like it was the best time anyone could ever enjoy. Easter was another special time of the year. Grandma cooked bowls of boiled eggs for breakfast. Grandpa gave special thanks for all the blessings of life. Then the hiding of the eggs. What fun to look for and find the colored eggs. Mamma always made me some kind of new dresses for Easter, and she would roll my hair on paper curlers. How pretty I felt for Easter Sunday! A new dress and long curls. My brother had the curly hair and blue eyes like Papa. I really envied him of all those two things. I shall never forget my beautiful new coat my mother bought me. It was a gray and red plaid with a red velvet collar. Oh, it was so pretty. One morning I needed some writing ink, or thought I did, for school. Well, since there were no ink in our house, the next best thing was black shoe polish. When Mamma wasn't looking, I slipped the bottle of black shoe polish into my coat pocket and took it to school. To my own sorrow, I spilled that old black polish in the pocket of my beautiful coat. It cost me a spanking and a lot of hard work and worry for Mamma. She was able to remove some of the ugly polish, but a dark stain was there to remind me of my disobedience. Thanksgiving and Christmas were each special holidays for all our family. The tall Christmas tree and in the church special programs for each of these holiday occasions. Santa placing gifts on the tree for the children, such wonderful gifts too, always practical, sturdy toys. My most beautiful Christmas doll, with her brown eyes and hair, was Elizabeth. I loved her dearly. Grandma made such pretty dresses for her. I had a chest of drawers for Elizabeth's clothes, a doll bed, and a stove I could really cook food on. The small pots and skillets made every wee bit taste so good. Of course, Mamma and Grandma prepared the dough and meat for me. Grandma would tell me, "You're eating your sweet cakes now." Little did I realize what she meant then, but I do now. How often I have recalled those precious words. "You're eating your sweet cakes now." My brother had his toys and had many happy times playing with his friends. Russell liked to tease my girlfriends and me, which sometimes ended up in a big free-for-all. I shall never forget when my brother and I were the victims of the old red measles. We were real sick and so red, I begged Grandpa not to bring the preacher home for dinner the Sunday we were so broken out, for I didn't want anyone to see us. Mamma kept the room dark to protect our eyes. We had dark green shades on the windows. No light could penetrate them. Of course, mumps and chicken pox were other children's diseases we contracted. Russell and I had them all. As I recall the sweet memories of our early life at Springer, my heart and mind floods to overflowing. The smell of the good earth, the wild flowers I picked, the taste of the new pecans in the fall, the luscious pears, peaches, plums, and blackberries. The cold, sweet milk, kept so cold in the milk box, which was refrigerated by Springer water piped and flowing through it. Grandpa, gardening, he was an expert gardener. The canning of the vegetables and the fruits, drying fruit and corn on the top of the porch roof. A clean sheet was used to spread the peaches, apricots, and corn to dry. Then if a rain came up on the roof, I went to take it all down. As you must know by now, I was a tomboy, for I had a brother to compete with. I know we cannot look mournfully into the past, but living in the past has one thing in its favor. It is cheaper. These days, every time one is about to make both ends meet, something breaks in the middle. But life is good, and the key to contentment is to realize that life in its entirety is a gift and not a right. When we moved to Oklahoma, Aunt Pearl was engaged to Harry Stewart, who was Grandma Benton's nephew. His mother was Grandma's sister, who died when Uncle Harry was an infant. There were 4 children left at her death, 2 boys and 2 girls. Grandma and Grandpa Benton had 8 children, but they did not hesitate 1 minute to take them. Those children were given a good home. 12 lively children in all. They were like brothers and sisters, all of them sharing and working together, helping in the home and on the farm. I still remember the big kitchen, the big pots and pans, the big dining table with long benches on each side. It took lots of food raised on the farm to feed growing boys and girls, and hours of work by Grandma to prepare it. Anyhow, we went to Ed Hubie for Aunt Pearl and Uncle Harry's wedding. Russell and I were so happy to get to ride the train again. Aunt Pearl and Uncle Harry lived in Texas for a while, then moved to Springer with us. Cialta, the beautiful baby daughter born to Pearl and Harry, was a blessed addition to our family. How much we loved that baby! Russell and I would almost pull her apart, we were so jealous of her love. Mamma finally limited our holding or walking of her Celta called me T and Russell Sol, and our mother was Aunt Butte. So vivid are those days, and we could not see the sorrow that was to be ours in such a short time. That God has a plan for our lives, I plainly see now that I am older, yet it is only natural for us to question why. When trials and difficulties come our way, I do know that the Lord led me to accept Him as my Savior before my precious mother was taken away, and that I have grown in my faith as I have been tested and tried through these long years. In August of the year 1910, Grandpa Stansbury became ill, chilling with his high temperature. The doctor diagnosed it as malaria. It ran its course in about 3 or 4 weeks, leaving him weak. As he was getting able to be up and about, my mother became ill with the same symptoms, but her illness was typhoid fever. She was so very sick, but she would tell me to be a good girl, help Grandma and Aunt Pearl, and then she would get me something pretty when she was well again. That made me so happy, but most of all I wanted her well. On the morning of September 5th, 1910, at 5 o'clock, God took my beautiful mother to live with Him. What a loss to all the family! But to a 10-year-old little girl, a 7-year-old boy, and their papa, it was the end of the world. I never heard such a prayer as my papa prayed for her life. We were in such grief to see my mother taken by death was such a vicious monster to me. I can see it as a blessing now. To go into the many details is too painful, but the procedures of caring for the dead then was not so easy on the family and friends. Life had to go on with the family. My grandma and Aunt Pearl were both ill when Mama was buried. They had typhoid and were very ill. Aunt Pearl was in bed 3 months before recovering. Celta, Uncle Harry, and Aunt Pearl's beautiful baby girl, not yet 2 years old, became very sick with summer complaint, and were also taken so quickly from us in September. Grandma held sweet Celta in her arms as God gently took her away. What sorrow one can bear when we know they are in God's care. Uncle Harry was also stricken with typhoid. He stayed on his feet as long as possible, helping to care for Grandma, Aunt Pearl, and Celta. He was so sweet and patient, caring for his family. But in October of 1910, Uncle Harry, too, was taken from us. 3 of our family gone within 6 weeks' time. God knows best. His will be done.